Alright guys, and welcome to part 2 of the diff rebuild. It's been a couple of weeks obviously. I just wanted to make sure that this diff was not going to fail after posting a video. So I've now done 500Ks and just been keeping an eye on how it's performing. So she's still nice and tight. The longest drive I've done in it is 80Ks straight, so 80 kilometers in total without stopping. And that was my bearing. Front diff temps were 55 degrees, rear diff was 48 degrees. So it's proving so far to be going pretty solid. I always get the hiccups whenever I start recording these videos. Basically, this is just a guide as to how I've done it, but do your own research before you do this, because you're going to see in the video this is definitely not OEM spec, but Land Rover made it hard to make it OEM spec. So hopefully you find it interesting. I'm going to show you where we started off at and how my plan changed multiple times throughout it. So you will watch this at certain points and think, hold on, that's not going to work. But just keep watching because I end up figuring that out. Let's get to it. Alright, so the first measurement is going to be bearing preload, pinion bearing preload, which is what I'm using the rope for. And you use a fish scale, and all you do is nice and consistently pull it and take the measurement that it takes to rotate that pinion. Probably in my eyes the most important and crucial part to setting up a diff is getting your pinion preload right. Secondly to your tooth mesh and backlash, but yeah. Alright, so on this particular diff assembly you have your two tapered bearings on the pinion, inner bearing just up here and your outer bearing. In between those two bearings you have what you call a collapsible spacer, and generically you're supposed to replace that spacer on a rebuild and torque the pinion nut to a specific torque to set your pinion bearing preload. And it was pretty consistent that whole way then. It was a lot better than when I was using my speaker cable yesterday. So I'm going to do that 2 more times just to make sure that my readings are true, and then we'll go from there. Again, 0.64, that was 0.6. It was sitting at 0.64, but then it dropped off at the end. So, alright, so now obviously that pinion mesh is done. I'm going to sit this cram wheel back in there. I just want you guys to know that what I'm doing is risky because it doesn't have, I can't find the specs and stuff, and majority of the time the diff failure is just these carrier bearings here, top and bottom, not the pinion. So you're probably better off just doing these bearings and leaving the pinion alone. But looking at the state of my diff, I'm not doing it. I'd rather run the risk of trying to rebuild it myself with just what experience I've had in the past. But for average Joe people, you need more tooling there, so you need a dial gauge and yeah, all your fish scales and all that crap. So whereas if you just do your carriers, you basically only need a bearing puller. Alright, so once again, this is not the right way to measure your backlash, but I can't get my dial gauge set up right to get on this crane wheel, so it's gonna have to do. It is what it is. So in my experience, that's way too much. But that could be because I don't actually have enough pressure on the carrier bearings. So instead, I think what I'm going to do is bolt this housing back on quickly and measure the preload it takes to turn it. Right, so now we're going to be getting the inner race out, which is this race here. The easiest way is to flip the diff housing over. And you hit it out from the from this side here. Obviously, if you've got a proper bench, life is a lot easier. you got to get the original seal out first, which I normally just leave right. Like so. It gives you a clear view to hit the race out, which is just here. You can see actually, it's quite nice that they've done this. You can see on this side that there's actually a cutout in the that cutout just there is where you can put a punch in, and that's the only one. But yeah, it's quite nice. So I'm just going to hit that out now with a hammer and chisel, and we'll clean it up and we'll put the new one in. Alright, so this side has a shim on it. Right, so that spacer is what gives you your carrier bearing preload. There's one on each, behind each outer bearing race, and it's very important you clean them up, make sure there's no burrs, and put them back in behind the new bearings. Otherwise you're going to have a lot of backlash, so not worth it, and your diff will be sloppy. So it is important to not use a hard-faced hammer on your bearing races. That's why I use that dead blow. It does take a lot more effort to get it in there, but yeah, ideally you can use a puller and put the old bearing race on top, but my puller wasn't working too well. The threads are a bit fingered on it, so yeah, basically I've done this on the other other half of the diff housing as well. Exact same process, so I won't bother showing you. So the main reason I did decide in the end to just commit to the pinion bearing replacement as well was just the amount of varnishing that I've seen all over the diff. Like this, the diff had been well, not neglected by me, but it definitely been hot a fair few times with how black everything was, and yeah, just you'll see when I pull this pinion apart how lucky I was that I did decide to do it. Alright, so I decided to do the carrier bearings first, and then go on to the pinion one. Now, this bearing puller probably isn't the best one. You can get the 3-prong hook, which will grab it like this and pull it a lot nicer. I've also chopped my mounting bracket up for the puller to be attached to. So I've had to improvise, and yeah. Alright, so what I'm going to be doing is cutting the inner race off. Obviously you would have seen my bearing puller separate the outer, create the cage. So I'm going to be cutting on a diagonal, just hopefully to the point where it's breaking through, and then I'm going to chisel this free and pull the bearing off because my bearing puller is not working. What's that saying? Not fit for purpose. So you guys get to see the old school way. Right, so what you do is you cut it through till you're almost all the way through, and then you try and separate it with a chisel so that you don't score the actual the running surface of the bearing that it needs to go onto. So I'm almost through there, so hopefully I've got a shit chisel though. you should be able to crack it. You also need to have a decent bench. I've got neither of these. Bloody telecom people. Alright, so I'm gonna put my... I don't have a decent vice either. I hope you guys can bloody relate to all of this, because it's actually really hurting my feelings right now. So I'm gonna put this in the vice to hold it steady, and then I'm gonna try and split it with a chisel. There we go. So as you've seen then, it jumped. Means I've split this race. And there you go. So that's what happens. The important part is to not go all the way through, otherwise you damage the race, which is the diff. So if you do that, you're pretty much fingered. So I'm going to just cut the outer race off now on the other one and do the same thing again. Alright, so I'm just using the old bearing to press on the new one. So you just use the old inner race, turn it upside down. It's just important to make sure that you get your bearing square. Otherwise you'll do yourself a mischief. You do have the option as well, some people do like to preheat their bearings. I just don't think it's going to be, hopefully, I don't want to speak too soon, but I don't think it's going to be necessary with this one. So this is going on with this again, so I'm just going to try and square this up. There you go. It's just squared up now. And all you do is you press this until it hits the base. And that's it, done. Important thing to note as well with these tapered roller bearings is the outer race is actually matched to the inner race. So whenever you pull an outer race off of the bearing, always label it so you know which one to put it on when you're assembling the diff or anything. But if you do use a bearing puller to pull the old bearings off, then just do what I've done here, cut the race so that it separates, and then use this as your pressing tool, and then basically it'll fit straight over the top of the original shaft, and then you can tap it off because it's not tight. That's what I do anyway. Alright guys, if you do want to avoid doing the pinion bearings, but you do want to replace the seal, another YouTube channel called Land Rover Time, they're a fair bit bigger than me, do a how-to video on how to replace just the pinion bearing seal without messing up your pinion bearing preload and all that. So definitely go check that out if you're just wanting to replace the seal. Alright, so we're going to use a steering wheel puller of all things to get this off. So they're a standard 8mm thread metric, which I have an abundance of 8mm bolts lying around. This is the funny part for me, is most people don't like Land Rovers because they're unreliable and there's not much information. Me on the other hand, I like it because there isn't much information. I get to challenge myself and learn my trade better. Alright, is that free? Got here. So you can see where the seal has been running on this. And it's always good to run your nail over. And if you feel a groove, I don't. Sometimes I'll move the seal. If there's a groove, I'll move the seal slightly, not by much, but just slightly back, so that I don't have the seal running on the same groove again, because the chances of it leaking again are quite high. But yeah, that's where we're at. Alright, I think this should just pop out. Alright guys, so check out the state of that bearing. What a mess. That is absolutely fingered. I'm so happy I pulled this apart. So what we've got on here, okay, so the important stuff to remember. Collapsible spacer. Collapsible spacer is what sets your preload, which is what you measure with your fish scale. So ideally, if they gave you a proper torque setting, you replace this spacer and you torque this pinion to the specified torque, and that'll give you your preload. But because I don't have any of that, I'm just setting that nut to the same measurement that I spoke about earlier, 3.04 mil, when I put it back on, and I'm going to line it up with the paint pen marks. So that's what gives you your bearing preload. So we're going to pull this bearing off, we're going to reuse this spacer and this shim here, and put the new bearing on. You've also got a bearing on this side as well, which we've got to replace. So I'm going to pull all that crap out now, and yeah, but that bearing is rooted, absolutely fingered. Surprisingly, the rollers they're not the worst I've seen. It's still got all the hard facing. Yeah. Right, so to get the inner bearing out and this oil seal out, all I'm going to do is hit the bearing with my drift from the inside so that it pops the seal and the inner race out. Alright, and there's the bearing and seal out. So we've got the same scenario of getting these races out as well. You hit them from the opposite side. So I'm going to hit this one towards me, and I'm going to hit the inner one towards the inside. Alright guys, it's really important that this little spacer here, the shim, goes in behind that bearing race again when you put the new one in, otherwise your tooth mesh will be out. Very important, make sure you do that, not to lose this shim. So that's for the rear. So front bearing had no shim, inner bearing had a shim. I'm saying that for myself, not for you guys. But yeah, it's all important for you as well. So front bearing, it's just bearing, inner bearing has the shim. Alright, so that worked really well, apart from the fact that I didn't use a thick enough plate. So if I had a thick plate, it would have been a lot easier. I was being a bit lazy then. I should have just chopped 2 bits of metal and put them on together, but I didn't. So yeah,
If you've got a proper internal bearing puller, you won't have this drama anyway. Right, so I'm just putting this in the vise so that I can hit this bearing in. After doing this, I'm definitely going to invest in a proper bearing puller. I think the same for you guys. If you're serious about having a full-blown crack at this, you won't regret getting yourself a decent quality bearing puller, internal and external. Once again, use the old race. There we go, this will work. It's not quite all the way. Obviously you guys know I'm hitting the old bearing here and race, not the new bearing. So guys, I know I'm being quite rough and primitive, but the whole purpose of this channel is to do stuff in a way that anyone can do it in their garage. I'm trying not to use as many specialist tools as I normally would, just to sort of help you guys relate to what I'm doing. So hopefully it does help you and show you techniques that I have to do, especially when I was out in field service and working in the bush and stuff. You'd learn a lot of these out there. So not the most hygienic or professional way of doing it, but it does get the job done. Alright, so obviously I'm doing the same thing that I've done with the carrier bearings. So you got to cut the race first, get all the rollers out, and then yeah, you just slowly chip away at the inner race and be patient with it. Ideally, if you got a Dremel or a die grinder with a cutting disc, it'll be a lot easier for you to do it. I didn't at the time, but I did end up with one later on in this job. So yeah, you just, patience is a virtue of this. Don't try rush it, because if you do take a nick out of the tooth or the main shaft, I wouldn't overly be using it if you end up going too deep with it anyway. So yeah, just take your time. Alright, so that bearing's off now. That was a fair bit harder to get off, but it's more because you have to cut so close to the pinion gear, which you really don't want to nick at all, because it just puts a weak spot in. I managed to get away scot-free. So yeah, now it's just time to, I'm going to put this in the freezer, and I'm actually going to put the other bearing for it in the oven. And then I'm hoping that I can hit this on a fair bit easier, because this is going to be a bit of an awkward one to press on. Oh, I've got ice cream in here. I'll have to eat that later. 120. Put her in there for, I'm going to leave them in there for half hour. Alright, that's why freezing and oven works pretty good. And you can see the heat dissipating through that pinion now. Only thing is you don't get long. So make sure everything's polished up and clean, ready to go first try. If you got any burrs on there and the bearing gets halfway, you're up shit creek. Alright, so you got to remember to put your bearing in before you put the new seal in, and
I'm just going to put some oil on it. So we're doing the assembly stage now, so oil up all your bearings so that they're not going in dry. And then, yeah. It's easier if you've got a container, you can just put oil in. I don't, because this one's dirty. But you just put a bit of oil on there, rub it all in. Yeah.
Alright guys, don't worry, you haven't missed much. I actually pulled all this apart again and called the old boy in for reinforcements. So the GoPro didn't actually record, I didn't realise straight away. So all you missed was me putting the flange on, tightening the nut up, and finding that the bearings were taking up all the pressure before it was even getting to the spacer. So I called around Land Rover and all that, and no one had a listing for that collapsible spacer at all. They don't even sell the part separately or have a part number for it. So I hit up a machinist shop, and it was like a 2-week wait to get that solid spacer spun up with some shims to go with it. So I asked the old boy what he reckoned, and basically what we done is went down and bought some metal shims and then cut out our own shims and recollapsed the spacer, which you'll see now. Alright, so I've recruited the old boy in.
Hi folks.
What we have found is that the new bearing has a different taper on it, and basically it's preloading the bearings before the spacer. So we've gone down the road and got some metal shims, and we're just going to try and work out how many shims we need to put in before we can get the preload set up.
Do you have a screwdriver?
No, I don't. The hardest thing is that there's no collapsible spacer listing for Land Rover, so obviously they don't want you rebuilding these diffs. Alright, so basically we got these metal shims from Napa Auto Parts, which is the company that took over Coventry's. You just call them, they're just metal shimming sheets, and they just come in a few different sizes. So what we're cutting down at the moment is the 0.25mm shim. We did end up using 2 of these so that we had enough spacing between the 2 bearings, and then we continued to crush the collapsible spacer down. So I found the best way to cut the shims out was with jewelry side snips, and then the old boy was using the Dremel with a cutting disc on just to cut out the inner circle, but for the outer circle the jewelry side cutters was definitely the best option. Alright, so this time around we actually had 4 shims in there, sorry. That was a grand total of 1mm of shims. It was just too much, so the bearings weren't touching the outer races at all. So basically we pulled the pinion back out, pulled 2 shims out, and then put it back in. At this point the bearings were close to the race but still not quite there. So we just made the choice between us to crush the spacer to the pinion bearing preload that we wanted, which I think worked out pretty well. If you are going down this route, I definitely recommend Loctiting the pinion nut on as well. It would be good. It would have been good for me to get a torque setting or something for you guys, but obviously everyone's is going to be slightly different, so you're better off just slowly tightening the nut bit by bit until you get that preload that you want. Alright, so it's all started. We had 4 shims in, so a mill's worth of shims. We've had to pull 2 shims out because it was actually too many shims. So we've got 0.5 of a shim in there at the moment, and now we're just going to keep on tweaking until we get the right, or till we're happy with it. We don't know the specs, so we're going by feel. We'll tell you what we find at the end.
Tighten it.
Yeah, tighten it. Still loose. Could have told you that already. Look.
I didn't realise that. I thought you'd taken it up already.
No, I stopped because you wanted to talk here.
Taking that
need to, isn't it? Yeah, it's getting tight with the gun now.
Phil. You need that back in, mate?
No, there's miles there, but now we're just crushing that space some more. That's the, you know what I mean?
Take that last one out.
Well, that's essentially what, unless you just want to crush the spacer, I'm more than happy to just crush the spacer. But let's just, is that what we're in agreement on? That right now we're just going to crush the spacer?
Just
Cool.
crush the spacer, as long as it doesn't fucking hit anything else in there.
That's fine, I'm happy with that. Let's just do that. Because all it's going to do is keep crushing it until we get to where we want. Yeah, that's
There we go. Now we're getting close.
2.6.
We got no lift in it now. Well, you got a bit.
Should get it now.
Hold that back in again. Okay, tighten up a wee.
Just so we've got a reference as to how far we're moving now, yeah?
That's why you don't take the socket off.
Oh, I've got a paint pen line on there. Socket too. Didn't really bring it out very far though, did I?
Yeah, they're probably about fucking a pound there.
That's a bit too light still, hey?
Yeah, just find out what we got.
Yeah. So as you would have heard, now we're just, there's probably still too many shims in there, but we just decided we're going to crush the spacer to where we're happy. We've already Loctited the nut. So yeah. Oh yeah, we'll need a bit more, don't we?
0.5 maximum.
What do you want, kilo?
Pounds.
Pounds. 0.5?
1.5.
Oh, fuck. Yeah, I want at least, what, 7 or 8?
Yeah, just go in or say I just want to fill the bearing.
That's feeling better. We'll just check every time anyway.
£4. 2.5 I reckon.
Otherwise I have to pull it out, put a shim in. But by today's going, that's exactly what's going to happen too.
There's a camera on.
Camera's on, yeah.
So if you're doing this, guys, you need to give yourself a good pull. That sounds
Good,
wrong,
yeah.
but you need
A good, even, consistent, and just
a
pick
long, consistent.
pick a speed and just stick to it.
That wasn't bad guessing, was it?
Is it
2.5.
2.5?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Right.
Hey, how's that for your fingertips?
See your head growing from here.
She's going to be near on there.
I was about to say, it feels good.
Right, she's on about £5.5 now.
Let's just oil her up. That other bearing might be a little dry.
You pour it right down.
Yeah.
Well, if it isn't right, it'll just wind its head off, mate. So,
Yeah. Worst case scenario, I'll just buy a new Diff. I'm already at that point, I can tell you that much. This isn't oil cooler level though. Well, you with your...
what's that?
This isn't oil cooler level, or you. Well, how you went with your, with your shit.
What are you talking about?
Well, you were almost at fucking... You were as bad as... Oh, I better not swear. You were as bad as me on your one, remember? You had all that drama with yours, and then you left the rag in the intake and started the car.
Yes. Not a good deal. Not a good deal.
I've ordered a new oil cooler because I'm making oil, eh?
Oh, yeah.
So unless it's an injector leaking, it's definitely not cooling in there. It's diesel. Unless there's an injector's leaking, it'll be through that oil cooler. Because it's got the fuel cooler on it as
Oil
well.
cooler or fuel cooler?
Well, it's the fuel. It's all in one. It's fuel and oil cooler. You buy it as a complete unit.
Can you go that way a bit?
Yeah, we can't drag this because the seal's under there.
Just want to turn it so I can go that way. So.
Yep.
Alright.
Yep.
6.1. I'll be inclined to leave that.
Yeah.
I want to do it again.
I was going to say 6.1 is normally like 6 pound is normally where I go for an old diff though.
It is an old diff.
It's not an old diff. It's a new diff.
It's only new bearings, mate.
Exactly, new diff.
What I would do before we put that crown wheel in and see how it feels with the crown wheel.
Good idea with the shims though. That was the old boy's idea. I can't claim that one. Ah, that's.
How is this?
Yeah.
6-1. 6-1. One dug.
I was about to say I sort of like to see it at about 8.
7 I reckon would be cool.
All right, we'll just. There's my paint pen.
One dug. I don't think you got much out of that.
I did. It moved. Well, it's definitely put some weight on it. That'll be all right.
How did it feel when you took it apart? Was it that
It
tight?
had 0.6 of a kilo, which is what, like £2?
Next to nothing.
Yeah, but you remember the state of the races, so all the measurements I took beforehand mean nothing.
There is actually a good thing about this because if it does whine, if it does start whining, all you can do is pull that out and take that shim out.
Oh
You
yeah.
don't have to pull your thing apart. And if you turn around and say, what
I
we're
do have
going
to
to
pull it apart, because I can't get the shim out unless I...
Ah, yeah, that's where the whole fucking thing apart.
Yeah.
What is this not doing?
There you go.
So break off pressure.
Just wait, let go of it. Yeah.
So break off pressure.
Yeah, that's right.
8.
8, yeah.
Break off pressure is 8. Shit.
What was it?
It was 8 point something.
That's right, if it's 8 point something.
7 to 8 point something.
If it was 8 point something, I'm happy. That's perfect.
I think it's too tight.
But we're in.
I'll take its head off. I'll do that one again. Just without tripping over this time. Okay. So 4.5, 5 for break off now, right?
4.5.
Yeah, that's break off pressure.
That's in kgs.
Oh. Yeah.
That broke off like 6.5 then, eh?
About 11 pound on the initial break off, but that'll wear.
That's fine. It's on zeros. What are you doing? Trying to fuck me, you fish scale or what?
Sorry, wind it back up.
You just put your. Can you put the safety strap on? Because clearly you need it.
I can't get the safety strap on, it's too,
Got chode hands.
it's too big for my hand, too small for my hand.
Before we do this, it does feel a little tight, doesn't it?
I'll do it this way. Not too bad now, mate. Should have left it where it was.
Yeah.
Hold it.
I can't back it off now, it's too late there.
Alright.
Alright, yep.
9.
9. You know what the specs are for a new Hilux?
No idea.
Old diff, 6 to 8 pound. New diff, 10 to 12 pound.
I'll leave it as it is then. It's a pinion bearing.
Alright, so we are at,
Cross fingers.
it's a bit more than I would have liked it to be, but we are at £9. It will wear in a bit. We were at 6 before my last Ugadug. I probably would have preferred to leave it at 6 than 9. I wanted it closer to 8 on the low side, but oh well. We're just going to do another test with the crane wheel and all that set in place and the casing bolted up with 2 bolts and see how heavy it is then. And yeah. Right, so we just bolted the housing on lightly. I'm just going to check this whole preload scenario.
What's with the bolt?
Do you want the bolt? What do you want the bolt for? You're going to pull the diff off the thing. I like your setup. How you can pull it out. Just do it like that. And have to see you pull the diff off.
Yeah, that's the direction. What's your direction of rotation? That way, yeah. Better way.
It goes in the diff like this. That's how it's bolted in the diff.
So I'm presuming that way. Yeah, might have it.
If we turn it that way. That's backwards. This is forwards.
Yeah. So forward is the way I want it.
It just, sorry, feels lighter going forward actually.
Yeah, it will do because that's the direction I'm not pulling against anything.
So when you're checking like your backlash and stuff, which is hard to do on this, we just sort of went off feel, but you don't. It feels like a lot worse until you actually bolt the housing down, because then it preloads your carrier bearings a bit, and it helps the tooth mesh a lot more. I'm just going to hold this diff. Righto.
Got it?
Yep.
Break off is coming on to 450.
You just sort of leave me fish scale alone.
You just do it so I've got something to pull again so you get the pull off pressure. That's up there. 610 in pain. Alright. Got it?
Yep.
I reckon that's sexy.
What is it?
£11.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you want to put, I'll pull this casing off and the crane wheel back out. I'll just double check the preload going this way, the right direction. Yeah?
Okay.
You've got to pull it off the 3-bonded anyway, but...
I wouldn't put any more pressure on that pinion though.
Oh, fuck no. Oh. I have to beep that out, because I know. Know what I mean about this gun though?
It's pretty good, eh? For
It's,
what it
it's
is.
so cheap, it's got some kahunas to it.
Yes,
And we need to work on a... What was that, sorry?
Let's try it,
Yeah?
Drives that way, yeah. The way we were doing it.
Why would it make a difference?
Because that's your leading edge of your tooth.
No, but like when there's no crane wheel in there, it's not really going to make that much of a difference, is it?
Oh, no. But I like to just do it this way, so. If this don't change much, then you've got no bloody preload on those bearings in the crown wheel.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, well it didn't, eh? So if you guys are listening then, when I done preload on this diff assembled with the crane wheel bearing, the old bearings and all that in, it was 0.6 of a kilo the whole time, as a whole assembly, which basically, as Dad was just saying then, means that your bearings are kaput because there's no preload on the carrier bearings at all. So,
I'm not saying they're kaput, you just don't have any preload on them now.
right, yeah.
Oh yeah, you do.
Yeah, I know I do. So
Well,
when you said
three-
£11, it was at
At
no.
£3, just over £3,
So what was that at?
8 point something.
8 point something. 8.5-ish pound, should you say?
Yeah, it's about
Yeah.
that. It's about £3. About £3
That's right. We won't know.
thrust on the bearings on the
That's-
carrier bearing.
We won't worry about that because it'll bloody confuse them. So the preload pull test, we've set it up at 8.5 pound. Ideally, what would your ideal spec speed, you say? More around 7, hey?
I like 7 just to feel
Yeah.
it, that's all.
I'm all about the 8 pound life, but closer to the low side. So I'm happy with 8.5. When we done the full diff assembly test, so with the chrome wheel and all that in, we got 11.3 or something.
11.4 or 5.
11.4, so we got what, 3.5, 3.8 pound of preload on the carrier bearings. So obviously this is our specs. Give us a month. Give me a month. Give me a month, and I'll let you know if my diff explodes or not. If not, then
If it starts whining, you know
Yeah.
what's gone wrong.
I'll let you know. But I'm pretty happy with those pressures anyway. That shim worked good. We only ended up using 2 in the end, and we collapsed the collapsible spacer more so that we could set it up exactly how we wanted it. I'm just going to assemble this diff now, and I might put it in. I might do it tomorrow. Alright guys, so ignore the dressing gown, but yeah, just I hope that this has sort of helped some of you. Obviously these are specs that me and Dad have come up with ourselves, so I mean, at least now there's a bit of a process that you guys can see for how we rebuilt the diff. I am a bit wary about the whole collapsing the spacer more scenario. I'm worried that that has made it weaker, and that if I go forward driving I might torque load that pinion and crush it more. So I possibly will in the near future be looking at making a solid spacer up with some shims and resetting that diff again. But so far I've literally done just under 1,000 Ks now, and so far so good. So I'll keep you guys updated. Obviously just chuck a comment below if you want to update on the diff as well. If you're watching this in 3 or 4 months after being posted, then comment below. Also just thanks for watching guys. I'm enjoying doing these videos, and there's definitely a lot more to come. I currently have an oil cooler, lower control arm bushes, a trans kit, and auxiliary fan drive pulley sitting in my garage ready to go at the moment. So the work is definitely not dropping off. If anything, it's picking up. But that works out well for you guys because my library will keep growing and it will give you guys more videos to do. So thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.